Good evening and welcome to the September 16th meeting of the Glenville Town Board. Please rise for the invocation and pledge of allegiance. As we recently marked the 19th anniversary of the tragedy of September 11th, 2001, it's been a tradition here for the past 11 years that the invocation we read is a short excerpt from President Bush's address at the National Cathedral on September 14th. We lost almost 3,000 Americans on that day. Please join me. At St. Patrick's Cathedral in New York on Tuesday, a woman said, "I pray to God to give us the sign that he is still here." Others have prayed the same way, searching hospital to hospital, carrying pictures of those still missing. God's signs are not always the ones that we look for. We learn in tragedy that his purpose may not always be our own. Yet the prayers of private suffering, whether in our homes or in this great cathedral today, are known and heard and understood. There are prayers that help us last through the day and endure the night. There are prayers of friends and strangers that give us strength for the journey. And there are prayers that yield our will to a will greater than our own. This world he created is of moral design. Grief and tragedy and hatred are only for a time. Goodness, remembrance, and love have no end. And the Lord of life holds all who die and all who mourn. As we've been assured, neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor power, nor things present, nor things to come, nor height, nor depth can separate us from God's love. We remember the 3,000 Americans we lost on September 11th, 2001. Amen. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please call the roll.
Councilman Martin.
Here.
Councilman Aragosa.
Here.
Councilman Godlewski.
Here.
Councilwoman Wozzbowski. Here. Supervisor Pettsley.
Here, as I had mentioned, tonight it is a special night. It's the September 16th Town Board meeting, but it's also the first of two budget forums for 2021. It's going to be an interesting year. I notice we have quite a few people on the webinar. We have a few people here in the room. I am going to try to present two presentations at the same time, so we're really going to test my ability here. I feel like I'm in mission control of NASA. There's too many screens, but we're going to try to present together, and we're going to have some questions and answers opportunity for both those on the webinar and also those here in the room. But before that, we'll get to town council reports, and I'll start on my left with Councilman Godlewski.
Just two things to report. First, and my apologies to Councilman Aragosa for stealing a little bit of his thunder on this one. I did just want to acknowledge, and actually he brought it to light for me, that this is September is Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month. You may have noticed some of the teal ribbons around town. I tried to incorporate teal into my wardrobe this evening. Councilman Aragosa did it a lot more successfully than I did. But it is Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month, and you know, it's important to show support for these causes. I know that Ms. Magi over in Outlaws is one of the individuals who's helping with dissemination of the ribbons in the effort to turn the town teal. So if you're looking for more information on that, reach out to her. Second, I did just want to acknowledge I was over at Indian Meadows this past weekend. My wife and I were over watching a friend of ours son play baseball, and the work on the basketball courts, the tennis courts, and actually the final tennis courts, which was the third set of paving to be done, is complete. They do still need to put the nets up on the last tennis court. I spoke to Highway Superintendent Coppola this afternoon about that. He says that's coming very shortly, maybe in a matter of days. But I did just want to recognize the work there. What a nice project that is, what a great improvement that is to our town. And just extend thanks to our county legislators, so Gada, also that and Constantine. Certainly anytime that there's money up for grabs, we like seeing it being spent here in the town of Glenville. And that's a great improvement for our community. And that's all.
Thank you. Councilwoman Wozzowski.
I have no report this evening, Mr. Supervisor.
Thank you. Councilman Martin.
Yeah, just briefly, we had another virtual meeting of the Code Revision Committee, and the basic question that was posed in the next phase of the revisions was to the staff in terms of particularly enforcement staff, Arnie and Jim, to see what they are, what their top issues are in terms of next things to address. And one of the items we discussed was the extent of secondary building coverage and the makeup and format of those buildings on a lot, but nothing conclusive was reached. But it was a very good discussion. Chris was on the call this time, and it was about an hour and a half meeting, and a lot discussed, but still things in the formative stages, more to follow.
Thank you. Councilman Aragosa.
Yeah. So, let me take my mask. Thanks, Mike, for taking the teal. But that's okay. Let's start with the census. The census is an ongoing thing. We got about 2 more weeks to finish up. Countywide, it's about 65% response, which is not great. That being said, statewide, the response is even lower. A lot of people are afraid. So if you know somebody who you think might be, scared or concerned about doing the census, try to explain to them why the census is important, what it does for them. Thank you. Next, I left a pamphlet for each one of us, hoping we can get them close to different parts of the town, or you get it up on your Facebook. There will be a drive-through pantry next Thursday at Collins Park in Scotia. 8:45, we'll start. For anybody in need, feel free to come out. No questions asked, no ID. It's contactless pickup. Sponsored by the Schenectady Foundation, the Regional Food Bank. I know the Sonic Lodge of Scotia is involved in the village, and the village police are going to help out. So thank you to all the volunteers that get involved in those things. Next, early voting. Early voting is it's a little over a month away. It starts Saturday, October 24th through Sunday, November 1st. Glenville Senior Centers, City Library, Clinton Street, the downtown library, South Schenectady Fire Department on Arrival Road, Miscue and Town Hall. They're all places where you can go and vote early if you choose. The idea behind early voting is giving everybody an opportunity to vote, but especially this year, it gives you an opportunity to vote in a setting where you might not have as many people there. It's really seamless. I did it last year. You go, they have a tablet there where they pull up your voter registration. You vote, and that's it. You can't vote again because you've already done it. It's very well done. Continuing on voting, I believe everybody in the town received this. If you plan to vote by mail, plan ahead. It's a really nice little postcard from the Postal Service giving you a lot of good information about if you plan on absentee ballot, make sure you do it early. Mail your ballot at least 7 days before election day. So if you saw this, don't throw it away. Keep it in case you do need to vote by mail. Lastly, I had a conversation with County Manager Flumin earlier in the week. He indicated that while negotiations are still going on, the expectation is that the amount towns receive in sales tax will be in line with last year. In other words, we're saying that we're not going to get more sales tax, but we're not going to get less, even though the sales tax numbers are down for the year. He'd like to give us more formal information about that, but we're not available for that.
Is that a multi-year deal or 1-year deal or
At this point, I think.
1-year deal? They're going to do a 1-year deal? Holy cow. So they'll be back at it in November to do a multi-year
Yeah,
next
you know
November?
what? Let me get you that information and I'll get back to you. So I
Okay.
can be sure. Lastly, I'd like to ask Chris if you'll come to the podium with me. I have a resolution here to read from the county legislature honoring the town of Glenville for our 200th anniversary.
Okay, thank you. Hang on a minute, let me get the right camera shot for it. There you go.
I'm going to go ahead and read this. Schenectady County Legislature, resolution honoring the 200th anniversary of the town of Glenville. Whereas originally settled by the Dutch in the 1600s, Glenville incorporated in 1820 started as a farming community and produced crops such as broom, wheat, dairy, and whereas Glenville remained a farming community throughout the 19th century until the early to mid 20th century, when the population flourished with the returning of those from World War II. Industries such as tea offered jobs, housing development grew, and thus the community began a transition from farmland to suburban. Whereas Glenville continued to grow, investing in infrastructure, school districts, public safety agencies, and whereas the town is home of many county and federal facilities, including the county nursing home, the airport, and farm, as well as the 109th National Guard, Air National Guard unit, and the Naval Reserve unit. And whereas today Glenville is a vibrant, diverse, and growing town that offers nearly 30,000 residents a place to live, work, play, and boasts wonderful school systems, beautiful parks, additional recreational opportunities, as well as revitalized commercial corridors. Now therefore be it resolved that on behalf of the Schenectady County Legislature, we honor and congratulate the town of Glenville on its 200th anniversary. This is signed by the chairman of the legislature, Jasinski, and his fellow legislators.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. We may be asking the legislator to come and re-present this. The committee's planning an event right now in October. We're reflecting proclamations now from, we received Congressman Tonko and a whole bunch of them actually today. So we will be probably doing an event for the proclamations and dignitaries to present those sometime in October. So we will.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so that concludes the town council reports. And at this juncture, everyone's looking at an empty podium. So hold on, folks, over there. I got to executive produce here too at the same time. All right, so we will now open the public hearing. That's the next item on the agenda related to the extension of a Water District 11 to include the following property within the town of Glenville, 53 Swaggertown Road. I will open that public hearing. Anyone wish to be heard either in the room or on the webinar? If you do on the webinar, raise your virtual hand and we will call upon you. I see no hands being raised either in the room or in the virtual webinar, so we will close that public hearing. Going once, going twice, still see no hands. That is closed. Next public hearing is the public hearing set to hear anyone interested in establishing an extension to Sewer District 9 in the following property, at the following property within the town of Glenville, 53 Swaggertown Road. That public hearing is now open. Anyone wish to be heard? Oh, we do have somebody who wishes to be heard. Oh, you see no picture. Okay, hold on. This is what's been happening. We had a little problem today and we had to re-engineer everything. Hopefully you now see a picture. And thank you for letting me know that. We are at the public hearing though, so if anyone wishes to be heard on this matter regarding the sewer extension of District 9 to 53 Swaggertown Road, please raise your virtual hand. Anyone in the audience? Seeing none, I will close that public hearing. Going once, going twice, seeing none. That is now closed. We will now move to privilege of the floor. We'll start with folks here in the room, and no one has signed up. Anyone interested in privilege of the floor? Let me open it first. The floor is now open. Anyone on the call interested in privilege of the floor? It is now open. Going once, going twice, seeing none. Privilege of the floor is now closed. We are now at the 2021 budget forum. And this is going to be interesting because I have some things to coordinate here. So I think what I'm going to do, folks, on the webinar, I think you can all hear me fine because no one's complained about the audio yet. So that's good news. I'm going to put you onto, wrong remote. I have 4 remotes here, onto the screen. And Mike and Jim are going to probably move. And you'll be able to view that screen as I go through the webinar. I hope I'm not too much in your way, but I like to stand even though there's not a lot of folks in the room necessarily. No, you're fine. Oh yeah, you're fine. I have about 4 views of it right here. So thank you for all attending. We have a pretty good turnout virtually. You know, this is an important budget forum. I've been doing budget forums every year since I became supervisor because to me, and we're really the only municipality that does this, to me, this is very important to have this transparency for residents to see what is going on with formulation of the budget. Is this mine? Yes. Yeah, okay. Didn't want to drink your water. And I think this year more than ever, it's really important because there's some real challenges coming ahead for us, and we need to start the conversation early. I like to have the conversation before the budget's formulated so people have input into it prior to the formulation of the budget and people see how it's starting to come together and why. I want to make a few notes before we start. First of all, it goes without saying that we are in the middle of a public health crisis. This public health crisis has touched everything, and it has touched the economy. It has put our economy on hold. And with that, we have certain implications to municipalities, not just businesses, as you all are feeling at home, and jobs, but that trickles down to localities, counties, and certainly the state. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. I was on the phone today, a webinar with Comptroller DiNapoli, and I'll share some of his thoughts. He's very clear to say he is not a policymaker, so he cannot answer some of the questions we asked him. It's not up to him, but he gave us some insights as to what he's hearing and what he's thinking might be in store for municipalities as we go forward. So I will make some comments about that as we go through, and I think it's timely and it's helpful. And last thing I just want to note before we start is that the Fed today, I think some of you might have seen it, announced that they're going to hold interest rates to near zero through the next couple of years, through 2023. So there's an indication to me that this is a prolonged situation. This is not a 1 year off. We're not going to get through this that quickly. And Comptroller DiNapoli really indicated the same thing. He said he would be prepared for a multi-year issue. He indicated, he used some words that concern me, and anyone who's concerned about the budget should be concerned, and some of it is short-term adjustments may turn into permanent cuts. Again, he doesn't make policy, so that's not anything he can tell you for sure, but that certainly is something that those 2 pieces of information today indicate to me that we're in for a multi-year budgetary problem with municipalities, and this is touching every municipality. So with that, I want to start the presentation. We'll go through it fairly quickly. If some of you have watched before, you've seen some of these slides before. There's some new ones in here that obviously that have something to do with COVID. But I always like to start with, let me get to the right computer. I always like to start with the basics. So the town of Glenville has a $19 million budget, but that includes the entire budget: sewer, water, special districts, lighting, all sidewalk districts, all the different districts. The three main funds alone constitute a $14.5 million budget. And I want to talk about the three main funds. And for people who may not be familiar with municipal finance, town of Glenville has three main funds: the A fund, the B fund, and then the highway fund. The highway fund is referred to as the D fund. So the A fund, because we have a village within our town, we have to segregate some of our spending. Some of it is allocated to the village, and some of it is allocated to anyone just outside the village within the town. And so the A fund is the entire town, including the village. The B fund is the town outside the village, and the D fund is highway, which is assessed to folks who are outside the village, but within the town. So hopefully that's not too confusing, but we do have three main funds, and they comprise $14.5 million. I like to focus on that because those are really the funds that most people are touched by. Almost everybody's touched by. Water, sewer, lighting, sidewalk, not necessarily, and so they get a little bit goofy. So the budget is comprised of, as far as revenues are concerned, $7.3 million is the property tax levy. Sales tax comes in at $2.7 million, and there's two components to that. Mortgage tax comes in at just over $500,000, state aid $483,000, franchise fees $365,000. Those are the cable franchise fees. Those are the ones that I think are going to go away eventually, but you're going to see a decline, I believe, in that line. So that's another revenue issue we're going to have coming into the future. And then everything else, fees and all these other things combined, $3.1 million. Now, where does that go by department? And this is a banner year for us because it's the first time since I've been doing this, and probably in our history, that the police department do not make up the majority of our expenses. That distinction goes to the highway department this year, almost $5 million. Now, that's not personnel that bumped out the police department on that. That's all the projects we've been doing through the highway department. A lot of our sidewalks, a lot of these things are booked to the highway department. And equipment, they have a lot of heavy equipment in the highway department. Police, $4.6 million. The entire rest of the town, $3.2 million. And then, of course, we have our county charge of dispatch to the town of $835,000. Our debt service continues to go down at $558,000, and we run our parks on $390,000. So by category, wages really and personnel costs are by far the largest factor in our costs. $5.4 million in wages, health insurance $2 million, the retirement fund $1.1 million, altogether $9.2 million in personnel costs with the other benefits. 9.2 million of that 14.5 million. So that's the largest portion by far of our budget. It's important to really know that as we go through this, because a lot of folks say, well, cut back here, cut back there. And we're going to talk a little bit about that in our capital budget, but cut back means personnel. That's what I mean. That's where the money is. We've done a lot over the last 11, 12 years to bring this town all the fat out of the budget. And so that's something that the state comptroller talked a little bit about today on his webinar, as well as where municipalities are going and what they ought to be looking at. The good news I want to point out immediately, Glenville is financially strong. We're in a good position. Now, that's important to say immediately. So folks, residents ought to have confidence in that. But we're going to talk about really where we're going and how strong can a municipality be to weather the storm? How long is the storm? So we had a four-pronged approach for the past 11, 12 years to get us into this position. First one, we all know, we protected the fund balance. That means we protected cash. Over the years, we cut the dependency on the town's use of fund balance for its operational uses by over $1 million, which is 77%. We reduced it by 77%. We did that in the face of criticism from certain folks. Some people like to use fund balance because it's politically popular to bring down your potential levy in order to pay for your operations. But we've seen that's a dangerous road to go down, and we've seen other municipalities get into trouble with it. We could not have known that COVID was coming, but we did know we should always prepare for a rainy day, and it's here, and we did. And I think the residents are going to be very happy that that decision was made repeatedly for the past 11 years by the majority of this board. And there it shows we cut it by $1 million or 77%. We also cut our debt. I believe we inherited too much debt when I became supervisor, and we worked very hard to bring our debt down. And as you can see, we went from $23 million to $12 million, just under $12 million in the 2020 budget. This is important because that gives us more operational money within our budget that doesn't go to debt service. You saw how low the debt service was on that list of expenses. That's given us more opportunity to make other operational expenditures because we're not putting it towards debt service. And that's been important to put us in a strong position as well. We've cut our operational costs. We've lowered our full-time employee count by 25% over 12 years. That's something that I'm proud of because the people of this town work so hard. We have one of the smallest staffs, I would say, Linda, and I think they do the most work, and they're a tremendous asset to the town, a tremendous asset to our residents, and I want to thank them for all the work they've done. And I've mentioned this before, and it's worth mentioning again. Through this entire COVID situation, no one in our staff, and I think Linda can attest to this, missed the beat. And everybody responded positively. They did what they could. We got together and we found solutions to problems pretty quickly. We continue to service, and we get people coming in here saying, I can't get a building permit in this town, in another town. I can't see the clerk in another town, and they come here and they do business. So I'm proud of that. I'm proud of the work that our employees have done. They're a great asset. And then lastly, the last of the four, I call it a four-legged stool, not a three-legged stool, is we expanded our tax base. We had to increase our revenues, and we did that by boosting revenues through our tax base by investing in our commercial tax base to shift the burden off the homeowners. And that was important for making our budget a little more fiscally sound. So here's just a graph that shows you how we've protected the fund balance over the past 12 years or so, 10 years, 11 years. We're down to about $300,000 of allocation into the operational fund. You can't just turn it off like a water spigot, and that's the problem. If you get too deep into using your fund balance, you can't just turn it off year to year. You have to continue to replace it. It's like your savings account. If you're using your savings account to pay your mortgage and you run out of money, you have to figure out where you're getting that money from if it's no longer in your savings account. So we're able to protect cash, which has helped us. Now, what I want to say clearly to the residents and to the members of this board, and I've talked with Jason at great lengths about this, this is a year, and I'm open to the discussion, to talk about where do we go with fund balance in 2021. Do we continue to reduce it? There is a school of thought that says protect your cash as much as possible because things are going to get worse. There is a school of thought that says increase the use of your fund balance because it's a rainy day right now and that's what you're supposed to use it for, but you're going to have to figure out in future years if those revenues don't come back, that's a double whammy for you. And then there's some people who like to split it right down the middle and say, continue as you've gone, continue to reduce it slightly and continue to go in that way. So at this juncture, there's no decision on how much of our savings, how much of our cash we're going to use in 2021, at least in my budget. But I think this is if there's ever these kind of inflection points or a place to have a discussion, this is one of them. I will tell you that the state comptroller shared with us some thoughts on that. Didn't give a lot of guidance, but I think was cautioning, if you could read between the tea leaves, cautioning on revenues in the future. And clearly, if he said it once, he said it a couple times, temporary reductions may be permanent cuts. That's just something we have to think about as we go through this. And he acknowledged there's a lot of uncertainty in this, unfortunately, right now, and but there's nothing he or anyone else can do about it. This is our debt load that we cut. As I said, $23 million in 2009. We're down to under 12 million in 2020. That's just something, again, that has helped us with our operational expenses. And I want to just illustrate growing the tax base. This is a phenomenal 4.7, almost 5% growth over that time, over the 10 years. It is astonishing, and it doesn't look dramatic, but when you're talking about $2 billion, going from $2 billion or starting off at under 2 billion to just over 2 billion, that's an astonishing growth for a town. And so the town has been through a lot of growth. Our economic development policies that I know Jim and Gina certainly have been since the beginning, and Jim's been our chair of economic development, are paying off, and it's helping. Expanding that tax base is helping. Clearly, and we'll show the dollar in a minute, we only get 10% of the growth, but that helps in our budget as we go through this. So as far as our budget accomplishments go, for the first time, and this is critical, and this is something I think Gina and Jim brought up a year or two ago. I don't remember exactly when we passed it, but we created a capital reserve account, and that's helped us be able to manage the town's growing capital investment needs. And I'm going to talk a little bit about where we were pre-COVID and where we are post-COVID on capital improvements, but they're two different places, unfortunately. But we had a good position between our grants and our capital reserves to make investments in our capital needs. We created a debt reserve account, which helped us reduce our debt the way that we have over the past couple of years. So that helped us pay debt down faster. And we created a retirement reserves account. Now I'm going to talk about our retirement exposure shortly, but this has helped us protect the taxpayer from large swings. We have large swings when people retire. They walk out the door with their unused sick leave allocations, or their time bank, and that could be a significant amount of money, $50,000, $60,000. And so this retirement reserve account has allowed us to be able to protect the taxpayer against absorbing that swing in a levy or in cash because we have it in reserves. And I'm still proud to say, and this board should be proud, we are the lowest tax community in Schenectady County. We have always, despite some confusion on that from some folks, been under the tax cap, and we've properly planned for our capital investment needs. And I think, again, residents should take some solace in that as we go through this, storm that we're going through right now. This illustrates the tax rates of the different municipalities across Schenectady County. As you can see, Glenville far and away, $776, the lowest, continues to be the lowest. That's just how the other municipalities come in on their tax rate. This is the tax dollar. We've been using this since this predated me. It's been around the town for a long time. Hasn't changed much over the times, but this tells you how your tax dollar is distributed when you pay your annual tax. That can include school and property. School gets about 66% of your annual dollar. County gets about 22.7, almost 23% of your annual dollar, and the town runs just about 10 cents on every dollar, and that includes the highway department. So, we collect taxes here in Town Hall, and I get a lot of comments. I pay so much to the town of Glenville. We get 10% of that dollar you're paying that we collect out in the front corner there by our receiver. So that's just something I think residents ought to keep in mind as we go through this. We run this town on a very tight and efficient budget, and not a lot of revenue when you consider the property tax dollar, which is our biggest line. So as I said, we were moving along pretty good. And then something crazy happened in March, and we've had some impacts from that. So after 13 years of planning, we were ready to invest in our parks, our senior center, our town hall campus, our infrastructure, water infrastructure, sewer infrastructure, bridges. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. And personnel. We started adding personnel for the first time in years. And then there was COVID-19. So that changes a few things going forward. First of all, I want to talk a little bit about our tax cap. The tax cap this year, our maximum increase allowed is 2%, which is $184,000 in new levy is allowed under the tax cap. If we were to stay under the tax cap, that's our new number. And I'm going to just ask you to keep that number, say 185,000, just to make it easy. But we have some issues already. Our contractual wage increases with our unions will equal 162,000 in new spending. Our health insurance increases will be 100,000 in new spending, and our state retirement increases will be 200,000 in new spending. Just by waking up January 1st and turning on the lights, we have an additional $462,000 in new expense. If we do nothing else, but we can only go to 184 to stay under the tax cap. So we have a shortfall already of $277,000 if we were to stay under the tax cap and manage against those expenses. That's a challenge in a good year. That's going to be a huge challenge in this year. We have some concerns going forward. Councilman Aragosa talked about one of them, and I'm going to get into that in more detail, but we have our revenue concerns. So let's start with that. We have revenue concerns and we have expense concerns. Our revenue concerns include what's happening with AIM funding. The state comptroller today made it clear that he believes in his best judgment, the work he does in the state of New York with the governor and the legislature, that we could pretty much count on a 20% reduction in our AIM this year. That payment will be made in September, by the end of September. So we've got a week or two. And we will probably see a 20% reduction for 2020. 2021, I think he's indicated may be worse. CHIPS, he did not comment on, and it did not come up in the allotted Q&A time, so we don't know exactly where, if CHIPS, we can assume a 20% or not, but we receive about $300,000 for paving. As you know, this board authorized that plus the 150 out of our capital reserves to do 450 this year. So if we lose 20%, we got to make that up, because guess what? They're paving right now. And unless I go lay in front of the trucks, they're not stopping. They may not even stop then. Everyone's laughing here. I'm sure everyone's laughing on the webinar. So that's where we are with CHIPS. Mortgage tax revenues, we typically see a 30% increase between April and September. We don't anticipate we're going to see that. It's been flat. There has been some movement in the housing market, but the housing market, a lot of people like to say, oh, refis or people are buying homes. The home mortgages aren't the ones driving our mortgage tax. It's the commercial transactions that drive our mortgage tax. And we're going to see maybe one or two, but we're not going to see it to the extent that we've seen in the past. So we're probably going to look flat in that line, and that might be the best we can actually hope for. Court revenues are drying up a bit. There's two reasons for this. We had a perfect storm hit at the same time. We had what they call bail reform, which is handcuff the courts and handcuff the police officers, and no longer collecting at the rate we used to. And then we saw, of course, COVID hit and they've closed court. They're trying to catch up, but we're not seeing the same revenues that we've seen in the past. And we're actually down, as you can see there, the second quarter fell by 68%. So that's an issue. Sales tax revenue, current contract expires on November 30th of this year. The city and the county, as alluded to earlier, can unilaterally decide to reduce or eliminate sales tax revenue share for the towns and villages. And this is a long-term threat. And that's why a one-year deal or a short-term deal compared to however that comes out, is going to make a difference for us, because we can't have COVID experience and have that deal made long-term, because that's just not fair. I'm glad the county manager reached out to you or got back to you. I've left a variety of messages. I did have an opportunity. Legislator Osterlitz did email me back, and I had a good conversation with Legislator Gatta on it. I impressed upon them the need to expand, not just keep as is, but to expand revenue. And I'm going to get into that in the next couple of slides. And so we invite them, as always, please take the message back. We invite them into a work session. Jim and I have been working on trying to get a legislator here for a work session to talk about it. I think it would be great if they can do that. I mentioned that to Kathy and to Michelle as well. So it's a standing invitation to the work session. But as you can see here, $1 million of sales tax, and we use that because a typical Target right in our backyard here generates about $1 million in sales tax roughly. And we get less than a penny of every dollar that's generated. That needs to change. Now more than ever, that needs to change. This is the biggest long-term threat to municipalities and to town governments going forward. And that needs to be a fairer, more equitable. We've talked about this many times. We need to protect the town taxpayer too. And the only way that's going to happen, and I'm not going to get into all the slides about all the other counties and what they do. That's a debate for another day, not for this budget forum. But it's clear that Saratoga or other counties share at a greater rate. Schenectady is among the stingiest of those to share the sales tax that's collected. And this slide demonstrates that. Over the years, from 2003 to 2019, Schenectady's share of the sales tax has grown from 37 million to over $70 million. But if you look at the blue line, and some of you on the webinar may have a hard time seeing those blue bars, they're so small, hasn't changed at all. We have not taken advantage of our own growth in our own community. I talked about that tax growth that we've seen in our taxable tax base in the commercial corridors. We've not seen that benefit as much because it's all going to the county. So for someone to say, well, the county needs their money too, they certainly do. But when you almost double, there's got to be room for share. I mean, that's only fair. So I think that's something that the county needs to understand. I think that's something that the residents, all you residents listening, need to help us with that message. There is growth in sales tax. There has been growth in sales tax for the past 16, 17 years, and it needs to be shared with other communities within the county. And this just demonstrates for every dollar that comes in, that penny is not warped. It's actually, we had to carve it out and give it back to the county because we don't get the full penny on the dollar. So we get less than 1 penny. And there, that bar right there, that red bar shows you the difference between the county and the town on sales tax revenue. That's important, folks. That's important to a budget, not just ours, all the other, Rotterdam and Niskayuna and everyone else, when we're seeing the challenges we're seeing in revenue concerns and expense concerns going forward this year. On the expense side, New York State retirement kind of gave it to us pretty good. We have an increase this year of 19% for police and 12% for non-police. As I said, that will add $200,000 to your town spending for retirement spending. The comptroller was asked about this, the state comptroller, and he had indicated that unfortunately, although, because the first thing I would say is, well, wait a minute, we're so dependent on the stock market, and the stock market has come roaring back from the the early days of COVID. And he admitted as much, but unfortunately, they have to take where they are on the day of March 31st. They freeze that day in time, and they say, this is where we are, and this is where we think we're going to be, and so we have to assess you on that day. So we're over-assessed, but that doesn't matter. The point of the matter is we're going to have to pay that, and that may come back and help us next year because they may adjust downward if the stock market continues on the track that it's going. And our health insurance expense continues to grow. Now, this was actually a lower increase, and I said this from the beginning. We may see a lower increase because a lot of folks did not go to the doctor. They did not do their electives. They did not go to the hospital. They tried to avoid it. And so I think what we saw was a lot of people were expecting utilization to go up, but it really, in reality, did not go up to the extent that folks were thinking. It's still a sizable increase, though. $100,000 is not easy to absorb. Retirement payouts. This is a big one that we have to manage against all the other things going on. We expect 6 possible retirements in 2021. Reality is there's 10 who are eligible, but with conversations we've had, department heads and folks directly, we believe 6 will go at some point in 2021. That will cost us $250,000, as I mentioned. Oops, wrong computer. In the next 3 years, we expect another $500,000 to be used in 11 employees over the next 3 years. So we have as we go through this multi-year revenue problem, we're going to have a multi-year expense problem in retirement payouts. And I'm not sure that our retirement reserves are going to necessarily last that long. I would say probably not. No, our comptroller is shaking his head, so that's not a good thing. So we're going to be hitting that issue. We're going to have to start managing that now because we're going to be hitting that issue when we're hearing that revenues are going to continue to be a problem over the next, at least through 2023. Capital projects is an area that we could actually look at and try to find ways to scale back. Unfortunately, we do have right now in 2020, 14 capital projects were planned for 2020 and are still under consideration because they're frozen under consideration for 2021. Now, I said early on when I did my COVID impact to the budget presentation back in May or June, we're not going to treat every project the same, because not every project is the same. Some projects will have grant components to them. Right now, a lot of the grant components are frozen, but if they become unfrozen, we'll continue those projects. Some have dedicated reserves already, so we'll look at those differently. Some are close, and actually we finished many of them that are close, and we've started, we're going to be starting one that's not so close, but it has, some of these components have some borrowing already attached to it. So depends where we are in the process of the project will depend on how we want to go forward. But we won't just blanket say everything's on hold. We're going to look at everything case by case, what makes sense, what doesn't make sense. Tennis courts, perfect example. We had some county money into that, and we put town money into that because we had county money into that. So it made sense to go forward with that and finish that project. Senior center, it made sense to finish that project. We had grant money that was already allocated to it, so we had to finish it anyway. So those are some of the things that we're going to go through and decide on a case-by-case basis. But just to make it more interesting, in the budget request that came in from department heads, we have 35 new capital requests, which surprised me a little bit. Now, we did say to folks, give us what you need in case something changes. We need to know where the priorities are. I didn't realize there's going to be 35 capital requests totaling $3 million in the middle of a public health pandemic and revenues dropping and expenses going up. This is not going to happen. But I do want to put it out there that in the 2021 budget, there are 35 capital requests, and we're going to talk about, the board will be talking about those as we go forward. We received 11 new day vehicle requests at $400,000. That's pickup trucks basically and light duty stuff. This is not plows and backhoes and things to get projects done. This is just wanting to replace new vehicles. That is not going to be in my budget. I can tell you that right now. In fact, it's already not there. Now, serious one to talk about, our water plant has some needs. We have some short-term needs, we have some long-term needs, and we're assessing those right now with our engineers and our DPW folks and our comptroller, and we'll be looking at doing what we need to do. And this might be a case because it deals with our water supply. This may be a case where we'll be bonding something. We can't, there are certain capital projects that we just cannot put on hold because we have a responsibility to deliver those services. And that is, water is one of them. My computer wants to do an update in the middle of this, so I'm just gonna say postpone, so I don't wanna knock you people off the webinar. Dawson Bridge is a bridge on Dawson Road, thus Dawson Bridge, that we need to deal with. It has some concerns that we're talking about now, and that's a sizable capital investment, but that's something that we would probably see in this budget. So when people do see some capital expenditures in this budget, I just want them to understand it's public safety. Most of it's public safety related, water plant, bridges, these types of things. We've been trying to search for grants for both water upgrades and the Dawson Bridge. They're not a lot out there right now, but we're going to continue to look for the grants as we go forward. Paving program is important to everybody. This board was able to allocate another $150,000, I mentioned earlier, to pave the Scotch Bush area, which would not have gotten done otherwise. So we're going to look at our paving program for 2021 and try to continue in the face of potential chip cuts, try to continue making those investments. And the last one, which we have to talk about, is Town Hall and where we are with Town Hall. Obviously, as we talked about before, everything was put on hold. Our grant, our $1.4 million is still on hold. But this board, inaction is not a decision. This board is going to have to make a decision on either going forward with the proposal and perhaps not getting the grant. We don't know that. This board's going to have to make a decision with potentially abandoning that proposal and saying that we do have to address. One thing I'm adamant about, we do have to address some needs in this building. If we stay here, then we have to address some needs. I mentioned to you at the last board meeting, we have a particular, I believe, crisis brewing that we're trying to manage. When folks come into this little tiny hallway here, we have no social distancing. When they come into court, we have to put them outside. That's been working when we have these beautiful nights, but pretty soon we're going to get into rain and snow, and it's not appropriate to have people stand in rain and snow while they're waiting to come in. We just don't have the capacity to handle storage. We don't have the capacity to handle people to the extent we should, and we don't have the capacity. I don't think it's safe. And again, I don't mean to always keep pointing to Linda, but we're doing this every day. I think you would agree with what's going on in the town. So if we don't want to build a building, and that I'm okay with that, we do have to address. There has to be separate entrances for court. It's unsafe for our officers. Under the best of circumstances, it was unsafe. And now it's really getting to a point where we just can't handle it. The courts need more court time. We're trying to provide that by either canceling our work sessions or moving them somewhere else. We can't, this room is becoming too utilized, and there's just things we have to talk about. And whatever the answer is, it's going to be talked about during this budget season. Operationally speaking, I think we have to, what we've been doing is advocate with our state and county officials for fair share of aid and revenue. That means sales tax, that means chips, that means AIM, that means our grants. We have to continue to do that. I get on these webinars with the comptroller and we talk with our legislators, and we're working all the time and making sure I'm calling Dasney, and Melissa is on this call, I know, and she's on with Dasney a lot. We're always trying to move our grants, and we have to continue to do that. Expense solutions, freeze all new hires for 2020. We did that. We had new hires in the budget, and we said we just can't go forward with those new hires. Pare down the vehicle purchases for 2020 and 2021. Not going to happen in either of those years. And I want to give the chief kudos. Jason and I sat down with him, and he almost immediately helped us find a significant amount of savings in a variety of areas, and one of them was in the vehicle area. But the police chief came in with a very, I think, good budget, which was appreciated. And consider wage freezes for 2021 for all non-representatives. As I mentioned, the representatives, it's in their contract. They have to, we do have to honor the contract, so we can't freeze those wages without agreement. Now, I will tell you that Earl and I and Jason have spent some time talking to our unions, and we are not at agreement on that yet, but I did ask for concessions from the union to move their salary increases from 2021 to 2022, and then move 2022 to 2023. So add a year on the back end of the contract. We have not come to agreement with the unions on that yet, but at least the non-representatives, I think it's safe to say, probably will not be seeing a wage increase from my budget. So our priorities, as always, protecting the taxpayer, number one priority. That's what we're here for. That's our job, and that's what we've been doing. That's what we're going to continue to do. No budget gimmicks. A lot of folks have gimmicks in their budgets, and they're short-termers, and they get you through a year, but they set you up for a problem. And one of them is using fund balance. In my estimation, I talked about that earlier. So we're not going to do things that are going to try to get us paper over this problem and hope for the best. Because as I say, we need to hunker down for a multi-year 2022, 2023, perhaps 2024 before we get some normal revenues here. No hidden stealth taxes. Now, let's be clear about this. State comptroller said there was two things municipalities should start considering. One is changing the fee structure to make up for lost revenue, other revenue. A, that's not going to get you there, number one. But B, I think that's a stealth tax increase. And we've seen other municipalities do that. Now, we are going to look at our fee structure because we have not increased fees probably 14 years, I would say, since I've been on the board. And we are way behind and out of line with other municipalities, and we have to do things so we're a little more fair on some things. Some things aren't equitable in the code on that, but it's not going to be something to try to make up for tax revenue, because the changes that we're going to do will never even come close to a fraction of trying to make up for the revenue. So that's not really what we're trying to achieve. The comptroller also noted the second thing that municipalities are looking at. He's not saying one way or the other if anyone should do it or not, but the second thing, and I took notes because he was actually very engaging and had a lot of good things to say, was furloughs. He said they're starting to see municipalities dealing with furloughs and layoffs, and that's something that this budget is not going to consider, but that's something I think folks need to understand is happening in other municipalities around the state. We're not going to reduce services. I'm committed fully to make sure our residents receive the same services they have always received. So we're going to figure out how to continue to deliver those. I already mentioned no short-term gain for long-term pain. That's kind of relates to number one. So next year I'll take that out and make this a little shorter for you guys. No overuse of using or plundering on the capital reserves. Now, like I said, I'm open to talking about strategically using the capital reserves a little more heavily than we have in the past, because we're in a kind of a rainy day. But we're not going to go crazy with it. We're not going to over rely on it. We're going to stick to our adopted fund balance policy. This board has adopted a fund balance policy to guide us, and we've always stuck to it. We're going to continue to reduce our town debt burden. I'm not a fan of taking debt. I'm not a fan of this concept of this bond's going away, so let's replace it. That was the mantra when I came on the board, and I quickly changed that. I don't believe in that. You use debt when you need to use debt strategically, and you use debt when it makes sense to use debt. And I know the argument now is we're in historic lows for interest rates, so that's a plausible point, and that's something to consider. And I think we're going to be there for quite some time, so we don't have to rush into it. I think the rates are going to stay low for a while, but that certainly is a reason to start thinking about potential, maybe taking on debt. But as I like to tell people, if you borrow $1 million at 0%, you still have to pay back $1 million, and it still impacts your operating budget. As I mentioned before, that 558 becomes 658 or whatever. So it still impacts operational budget, and it would impact the tax cap going forward. So we have to be very strategic about it. Hold the line on new costs. No new vehicles right now. Buying not a lot of new things at this particular juncture. Stay under the cap as we always have. And the challenges ahead are, as I mentioned, our retirement payouts continue to stress the budget. Put the two together over the past 6 years of $750,000 we paid out, and we're likely to do more in the next 3 years ahead. Tax cap is always a problem, even though I'm dedicated to staying underneath it. Health insurance will always rise. That's just a constant. You're never going to get a health insurance cut. So that's going to always continue. And then our state is taking aim and chips away potentially. And those could be long-term, as I mentioned, long-term issues for us. And the fair share of the sales tax formula. That's now and immediate and something that should be discussed. So that's kind of where we are. I want to leave you, and we'll open it up for some questions either in the room or on the webinar, because I think it's important to hear from folks. But where are we going? I think that's what everyone's kind of interested in knowing. First of all, we're going to keep the tax rate down, as I mentioned. We'll stay under the tax cap. Mentioned we're going to preserve our services, so residents don't have to worry about things going away or things not happening. We're going to continue to preserve those services. But the big challenge for this board is going to be managing against the uncertainty before us. It will be some time before we know what our revenues are truly going to be. So we're going to have to make decisions in unfortunately difficult situations without all the information you would normally have. And we're just going to have to do that and decide how we're going to manage against uncertainty and adjust for planned projects. So making sure we stay open to understanding that there are projects that have been planned for and there's capital reserves for them and their grants. And I touched on that before. But I want to summarize that we've really budgeted wisely for 12 years now. We're in solid shape to weather a storm. However, our resources are limited, and the storm, if prolonged, can lead to significant consequences for our local government. We will monitor our position and we will adjust accordingly. We will continue to adjust. And that, I think, is what I want to impress upon the board more than anything. Flexibility is going to be our best defense against uncertainty going forward. So that's where we are and that's where we're going. And as I say, it's going to be an interesting year. I'd like to open it up now for anyone who has any questions, thoughts, concerns. We can do that. As I wait for hands, if you raise your virtual hand, we can unmute your microphone. But anyone in the room have any comments, questions, concerns, thoughts? Let me get back to get you off there.
Mr. Supervisor,
Yes, Gina.
just one thing I'd like to point out, we're going back to the slide that we talked about capital projects, specifically the Dawson Road Bridge. The Dawson Road Bridge has needed to be done since before I got on the board in 2010. That's been a project that's been put off. And I believe it's been weight restricted for several years, meaning that fire trucks and other heavy vehicles have not been able to cross that. So that has endangered, put a stress on the fire departments to try to find a way around. And when there's calls on the road, so some of these capital projects that may go forward with bonding, I would say, are some that have been around for quite a long time.
Absolutely.
Because I remember sitting and hearing about it the first couple of months that we were in office and thinking, oh my gosh, and I know that, Tommy's been looking for grants and we've been looking for grants and trying to find ways to engineer it so that it wasn't quite so expensive for a long time now, so.
Thank you.
Mr.
Yes.
Supervisor, during your short presentation, I was able to get a little clarification from the county manager. The sales tax deal that's being negotiated is a long-term deal. His object of giving us some information tonight was just to give us some reassurance for the coming year.
So it is another 13-year deal?
I don't have that.
Okay.
But it will be a long-term deal, and as soon as we have some more information, I'm sure we'll get it.
Well, in that regard, I think it's an important message to carry back that a key negative of the current agreement is that the amount paid to the towns has been at a fixed rate for 20 years. So when you factor in inflation, and I encourage you to go to the Bureau of Labor specific website, you'll see that the dollar that we had in 2020 or 2000 when the agreement was originally signed is worth 67 cents. So we have actually had a cut.
Not-
in revenue from the county when inflation is factored in. So we need to have at least an inflation escalator in the agreement for the towns, just so we can keep steady and keep pace instead of losing. That's,
I think that's a reasonable request, that even if you say, okay, start off where we are, let's start off where we are and then escalate with growth so that all boats rise together and you're sharing as you're, obviously we're not taking 50 cents of the dollar, but certainly find a way to at least rise with the benefits of what's going on in the town and the
well, we
county.
keep pace with the rate of inflation.
That seems very reasonable to me. Not to mention, as we go back and look at the slides, every year we're seeing another new $500,000 in personnel costs just layer on. Without revenues like sales tax, which is why sales tax exists, it's supposed to be shared with the local governments, that goes on to the tax levy. There's no magic here. There's no way of producing these quarters and these dollars any other way than through revenue taxes. And so if you're not getting the sales tax growth, then you're going to look at your levy as the only other way to cover those expenses, or you're going to cut services and jobs. So to me, it seems pretty strong case for asking at least for an escalator that keeps up with the cost of local government continuing to increase. Any questions on from folks who are on the webinar? I don't see. I do want to point out real quick, I see quite a few members of the village trustee board here. I want to thank you for joining us. Please feel free to jump in if you have a question or comment. I do see Legislator Austerlitz is here, so thank you again for joining. I think you've been on just about every webinar since we started the webinars, and I want to thank you. I always invite you to say something, Michelle, and you always decline, but you're free if you'd like to just say hello to everybody. I can unmute you if you like. Not responding, huh? Give me the silent treatment, Michelle. All right, the offer stands, but no response. But maybe she's not at their screen at the moment. But I want to thank you all for being here for this. If you had fun and you enjoyed it, tell all your friends that I'm doing it again Tuesday, the 22nd at the Senior Center. We can double our fun there if you like. There'll be no webinar attached to that, so that's an in-person only with social distancing taking place. And if you couldn't make tonight, this will be on the video on our town website, but I'll also do it again in person for questions, comments. As always, you can send questions or comments into me as you like. And as we go through this process, stay tuned. We have a lot of interesting days ahead of us and discussions ahead of us. So seeing no questions, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is a resolution approving the extension of number 50 to the water district number 11. Do I have a motion?
I'll move it.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, well, seeing none, as I mentioned, we had a public hearing on this. This is just the extension for 53 Swaggertown Road of our water system. With no other,
Mr.
oh, yes.
Supervisor, I think it is important when we do these, just to note that the cost of the extension is going to be borne by the property owner,
Yes,
not the town.
good point. No other comments or questions? Please call the vote.
Councilman Martin?
Yes.
Councilman Aragosa?
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski?
Yes.
Councilwoman Wozzowski?
Yes.
Supervisor Pettsley?
Yes, resolution passes. Next, resolution 10, approving the extension number 22 to sewer district number 9 regarding 53 Swaggertown Road. Do I have a motion?
I'll move
Do I
it.
have a second? Someone second it.
I'll second.
All right, because someone at 53 Swaggertown Road is going to be mad if you don't. So moved and seconded. Any discussion?
No, just again to point out, Mr. Supervisor, that this extension to the sewer district 9 will be, the expense for that will be borne by the property owner as well.
Thank you. Seeing no other questions or comments, please record the vote.
Councilman Martin?
Yes.
Councilman Aragosa?
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski?
Yes.
Councilwoman Wozzachowski?
Yes.
Supervisor Pettsley?
Yes, resolution passes. Next resolution, Resolution 11, scheduling a public hearing for Wednesday, October 7th at 7 PM here at 18 Glenridge Road to hear any person interested in the proposed local law to amend Chapter 27 Code of Ethics of the Code of the Town of Glenville. Do I have a motion?
I'll move it.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Moved and second. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor, I would seek to make an amendment to the resolution before the board. I would seek to amend the resolution to change the date of the public hearing from October 7, 2020 at 7 PM at Glenville Town Hall to October 21st, 2020 at 7 PM at Glenville Town Hall. The reason for this amendment is threefold. Number one, as you're probably aware, Governor Cuomo's Executive Order 202.1 is currently set to expire October 4th, 2020. If that order expires, there'll be no existing basis in law for people to participate virtually. And I think that would be a very small or narrow window of time for some people to make a decision whether or not they want to come out and participate in the public hearing, and have to turn that around within 3 days. And I certainly think that as board members, the goal here should be to encourage public participation, to try and get as many people to participate in our hearings and our government action as possible. October 7th is the Wednesday before a holiday weekend. Columbus Day is a big travel weekend. People may be limited based on the fact that they have weekend plans. Third reason, it would give the Board of Ethics opportunity. I understand that the Board of Ethics canceled its meeting. It would give the Board of Ethics an opportunity to renotice a meeting when it complies with the open meetings law, and give them a fair opportunity to review and weigh in on in a formal manner the proposed legislation. So I would make that amendment.
All right, so thank you. You've made a motion. We haven't had a second. In the future, just please hold to the second before we get into too much discussion. So I have a motion. Do I have a second?
Yes.
Moved and seconded. Councilman Godlewski's laid out 3 reasons why he would like to push this back further. I'll tell you, I'll address the first one first. Governor Cuomo, who has signed these executive orders one after another, continues to push them out anyway. And the anticipation is that it'll continue to be pushed out until there's, what we're being told, until there's a vaccine, until there's some comfort level in allowing for folks to, in the governor's eyes, to come back out. So we certainly anticipate that this will be continued to be set forward. On top of that, these executive orders only allow for virtual meetings. We can continue to have open meetings, and we, as you can see by the folks here today, we do. We don't have to have these virtual meetings. We're doing this as a board because we decided that we want to let people continue to make the decision to stay home and safe. And we will continue to do that for quite some time, certainly through probably the end of the year. As much as I have to control a lot of different computers here, I don't see us turning the virtual thing off anytime soon. So that's really not a true, that's a red herring in my estimation. Holiday weekends, you know, I don't know how many people go away for that or not. We've had public hearings before holiday weekends before on Wednesdays. That's quite a stretch. And the Board of Ethics is going to meet and discuss it because there's, as you can see, a 3-week lag between now and when the public hearing is going to occur. So that's plenty of time for the Board of Ethics to meet. So those are my comments on that. I think that it's open. I think that there's plenty of opportunity for participation, and there's really no reason to delay it any further at this juncture in my mind.
If I could just respond.
Sure.
This board has previously anticipated Governor Cuomo's Executive Order 2021 running. This board's policy through the COVID epidemic has been not to conduct work sessions. That was actually changed under the idea back in August that the Executive Order 2021 was going to expire. And that's what reinitiated the public gathering of work sessions. I think without knowing for certain, to anticipate what the governor is going to do. I mean, frankly, it was widespread 2 days ago on social media that the governor was going to issue an order banning trick or treating, and then he came out and did exactly the opposite of that and said that he would.
Do you believe everything on social media?
No.
Okay.
But in this regard, I do think that, in the event that it would expire, I do think a 3-day turnaround for people to make a decision. Some people are still, frankly, I don't love the idea of being indoors presently. Some people are still uncomfortable attending stuff indoors in person. So I think pushing it out, I don't know what the harm is in pushing out additional 2 weeks. I just think it serves the public interest better.
Well, I'm not sure you're going to see much of a difference in 2 weeks between the 7th and the 21st between the public health issue and the concern for the public health issue. I want to correct one thing. The work sessions were not stopped because we didn't want gathering at that time. We could have certainly had the work sessions virtually for sure. Work sessions weren't held at that time during that time because at the time everything was on pause. There was nothing going forward. There's no reason to have a work session because nobody was doing anything other than day-to-day operations. We weren't planning things, we weren't discussing things. And so, I schedule them, so I'm pretty confident and aware of why they weren't occurring. They weren't occurring because there's no agenda for them. When there was an agenda for it, we had it. And it seems nonsensical to me to move this 2 weeks and use the COVID as a reason why it needs to go 2 more weeks because everything's going to be fine on October 21st, but not so great on October 7th. So that's my position on it. Any other comments or questions?
Just to respond, Mr. Supervisor, we were still having meetings throughout the COVID epidemic. I think there might have been one canceled, maybe not. But I do think the representations I made about the work session and why the work sessions were being not held, frankly, it's based on things that you represented to this board, that it would have entailed public gathering and limited to public gathering.
For no purpose. You're only telling half the story. Public gathering for no purpose doesn't make sense. But when we did have to have a board meeting because we had to act on business such as public hearings that we've had during COVID, and wasn't a concern to you prior to this, I think you're being disingenuous, but you made your point. I made my point. Anyone else have any other questions or comments? Seeing none, please record the vote. This is on the amendment to change the date.
Councilman Martin?
No.
Councilman Zaragoza?
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski?
Yes.
Councilwoman Wozzowski?
No.
Supervisor Pettsley?
No. So the amendment fails. We'll move forward with the resolution 11 as is.
Offer an amendment to the resolution as follows. Amending the text of the law, section 27.5 shall be amended to include subparagraph K, which shall read, quote, hold the position of chairman, vice chairman, or treasurer, or serve on the executive committee of any town or county political committee. I would make that motion to amend.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded. Any discussion?
Mr. Supervisor, this language is taken verbatim, or almost verbatim, from the town of Half Moon's Code of Ethics. The town of Clifton Park actually has a more restrictive provision in their Code of Ethics. As folks are aware, Mr. Ketley is the current county chairman of the Schenectady County Republican Party. He is also the supervisor of the town, which I'm sure you're also aware. The chairman of the Schenectady County Republican Party's job, purpose, is to organize, recruit candidates, and create campaigns to essentially win elections. It's his job coming up in 2021 to find a way to win back the seats currently held by myself and Mr. Zaragoza. Starting now, going forward, it's Mr. Ketley's job as Republican chairman to figure that out. Simultaneously, as supervisor of the town of Glenville, it's his job to work with us for the betterment of our town. As the full-time supervisor, he controls the flow of information to us, the town board members. He is the face or representative of the town, as seen by the budget presentation tonight. He's also the chief fiscal officer when it comes for budgeting purposes. So,
Councilman, I'm just going to make a point. The motion is to put it on for a public hearing.
Mhm.
If you want to make a motion to amend the actual law,
Mhm.
you can do that at the time that you're voting to consider the local law. At the point in time,
Sure.
At the point in time, they were dealing with the actual resolution to have it as a public hearing. You're not amending anything at this point in time.
I
Does that
would
make
just,
sense?
I understand what you're saying. I would disagree with what you're saying, however. I do think that there is a proposed public law or a proposed law that's going to go out for public hearing. I do think I have the ability to offer an amendment to what that proposed law is, as well as offer an amendment to the law on the day of hearing. The issue with offering amendment on the day of hearing or the day of vote is that if the law is changed substantially, the law then has to go back out to public hearing. So I think it is appropriate at this point in time to offer the amendments. And I think that it's fair game to me to do so.
But it's not in the resolution.
So,
But generally, just as a point, generally, when you have a resolution, the resolution is to call for a public hearing.
Yeah.
Right, so you have a public hearing, the public hearing, this has always come up, at least in the last 8 months that I've been here, 9 months. And if it needs to be changed, then we can go back. And if it's voted upon for that law to be changed, you can. But right now, the law is, but the actual law, what we're doing is calling for a resolution on that, for a public hearing on that law.
Sure.
So making an amendment to it, I don't feel that you can actually, right now, because we're not putting that law to a vote. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. But Mr. Redding, the law is part of what's being called for. So when the public weighs in, the public's going to be weighing in on a proposed law. And I think it's fair game for me to offer amendments to what the proposal is for the public to weigh in. I would also note that one of the things as part of this deliberation with the supervisor and with the majority members of the board at the last work session that Mr. Ketzley indicated, quote, I don't want to quote him verbatim because I'm going off memory, but essentially that he had asked me to look into changes to the law. I've done that when I saw that this came up on the agenda and I'm proposing those changes. I think to
You were asked, just to clarify the record, because you can't just go on and talk about things that you're wrong. You were asked to work with Earl and this board in conjunction on changes to the law. You have not done that. You've not reached out to any board member here that I know of to talk to. Let me finish, because you've gone on quite a bit now. And unfortunately, it's misinformation. Let's go down memory lane just for a minute, Mike, because you and I have worked on this, or I've tried to work with you on this for a long time. This goes back a year now, where you and I have talked about needing to do something. It was this board's desire to do something. You and I met, you and I went to breakfast together, had a nice breakfast, and you had indicated to me that you weren't interested in doing this because you were concerned how it would impact you. And you remember that breakfast. And I said, you know, Mike, no, it's not, Mike. You said that that's the concern. And I said, Mike, this isn't about you. And if you remember, I told you, Mike, I don't have an issue with you and I like working with you. But I asked you at that point, I said, if you have a concern, please bring a proposal to the board. Well, you bring it at the 11th hour. We've talked about it in a work session a couple of times. How many times have we talked about this? And you've never brought it up prior. It's a year later. You're bringing it at the 11th hour. I want to also just distinguish too, you are a committee member of the Democratic Committee. Our colleague over here is a member of the Democratic Committee. They do the same exact duties, have the same exact duties as anyone else on the committee. And your job is also to make sure politically that you are trying to defeat me, trying to defeat the other board members here. So let's not be disingenuous and try to paint this differently than what you and Mr. Argosa are doing as well. And you did not have this concern with Mr. Landry when he was supervisor. You did not have this concern, Mr. Landry, while he works for the county in a policy advising position and as an attorney to the legislature. It doesn't seem to concern you there. And you talk about how other towns have this provision you're trying to talk about. But when we tell you that most other towns in Scotia have what we're trying to do, you don't seem to care about that because it impacts you personally, Mr. Godlewski. And I'm dismayed by this attempt to politicize something that's important to this town, which is to have a greater ethics law. Right. If you want to talk about what you want to talk about, let's do it. Let's talk about it. But we're not going to do this ambush last minute, try to change the resolution that we've been working on for a year now because you want to make a political point.
Chris, there's things that need to be clarified with what you're saying. First off, the law that's before the board was first proposed in August of 2020. It does not go back a year in time. We've had discussions.
It goes back a year in time.
We've had discussions on ethics going back a year in time, but the law, the text of the law is from August of this year. So a little over a month. we've been discussing. The law that was initially proposed, going back to 2019, was completely different than the law that was proposed at the August work session. That is significant. With respect to my role on the Scotia Glenville Town Democratic Committee, I do hold the position of first vice chairman. If this amendment were to pass, and if this were to become law, I would resign that position. I would choose the town of Glenville over my leadership position on the Scotia Glenville Democratic Committee. As regard to what other people have done in other towns, specifically cited Mr. Landry, I have no say about the laws in the town of Niskiana. I have no say about the laws in the county of Schenectady. I have a say in what goes on in Glenville. I'm
Do we
proposing
have a
this amendment.
second? Do we even have a second? Did we get a second?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Okay, so you made your comments. I made my comments again. We have an amendment. It may be out of order, but Earl, can we just vote on it?
Yeah, you can vote on it. I just think that the way it's being done is not, it is out of order. Respectfully, I just believe that this is not how it's generally done, so.
I understand.
Well, I can rule it out of order if you think that's better, and then just
I would just
put
take
it
a
on the
vote.
work session.
I would just take a vote on the amendment.
Okay. So we have the amendment before us. We've made our points. Please call the roll.
Councilman Martin,
On the advice of the council that I just heard, our town council, I vote no.
Councilman Aragosa,
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski.
Yes.
Councilwoman Wozzbowski,
On the advice of council, I will be voting no, but I would also like to add for the record and for all those listening and all those here in the room, I'm not opposed to what Councilman Godlewski is suggesting. I think it's important to consider things like that as we are trying to base our proposed legislation on precedents that have been set in other towns. But I don't feel that it should be included in this amendment or this resolution where we are essentially just setting a public hearing. So my vote would be no.
Supervisor Ketzler.
To explain my vote, I'm voting no because I think it's out of order. Number one, I think it was brought up hastily and without any discussion. And I will perhaps surprise Mr. Godlewski that I am open to that discussion. I don't have a problem with what you're proposing. Absolutely fine. If we want to make that a part of our ethics code, then I'm not married to any volunteer work I do outside of this job. And that's exactly what it is. It is what it is for you. It is what it is for me. So I don't mind if we put it through the proper process and have a discussion at the work session about it, see exactly how it's going to work, talk to the ethics committee about it, and have a public hearing on it. That's fine. But we're not going to do it hastily. It's been the tradition of this board not to just to throw amendments out there and quickly act on them. So for that reason, I am voting no, but I encourage you, Mr. Godlewski, to please, let's keep talking about it because it's a fair point.
Mr. Supervisor.
I'm going to vote.
Mr. Supervisor, I offer amendment.
What-
Shall be added at the end.
we're not even after, you are out of order, Mike. You're out of order. Mike, you're out of order. You're out of order, Mike. Mike, you have to have some respect and decorum. You are out of order. We have not finished this vote yet. We're suspending this board meeting because Mr. Godlewski is acting inappropriately. We haven't even finished this vote yet. Let us finish the resolution vote and then I will recognize you.
Mr. Supervisor, I'm offering amendments to the resolution.
My God. All right.
I believe it's
So,
correct to do so as a-
I vote no. Resolution fails. On to resolution 11.
Mr. Supervisor, I offer amendments to the resolution before the board. I would seek the following language, that section 27(7) establishment, which states, I would offer this amendment. The ethics board members shall be appointed by the affirmative vote of at least 4 members of the town board.
Mike,
Mr.
sorry, I'm
Supervisor.
just going to interrupt you just for a second.
Sure.
This is, well, I just want to make sure that we're operating in order. So on the amendment, there was a vote. The supervisor has to read the vote into the record. So the supervisor, and then I want to hear what your amendment was about. Okay, so I don't think that we ultimately heard that. So supervisor, go ahead and read the vote on the amendment that we're talking about that was out of order to add subsection K.
Thank you very much. The resolution fails.
So now, Mike, just hold on a second. So now you're proposing a new amendment to the resolution for a public hearing, is that right?
I'm proposing an amendment in line with the amendment number 2 that I proposed, that would amend the text going before the public hearing on the ethics law.
Okay, so you're amending, you want to amend the public, you want to amend the code
Yeah.
that is being amended. Okay.
Correct.
I'm again, just, again, for the record, I'm just going to say that I think that that's not correct. If you want to read it in and propose an amendment, obviously you can do so. Just as a point of reference, I'm just wondering how many amendments you have.
Sure, this is 3, I have 7 in total.
And are they all amending the law, or are they as part of the procedure regarding the?
Why can't we just hear them all at once?
Yeah, let's hear
Get
them
it
all.
out of the way, Mike, instead of grandstanding.
This is
and
political.
maximizing the political benefit here, just read them all.
So if I may just be heard on that, I believe it's my right to offer one amendment as they come. They're specific amendments, they're different. Well, I shouldn't say they're different. There are a couple that talk about wording in language in the law where if one was accepted, it would obviate the need for a subsequent amendment. But that said, I do believe I have the right as an elected board member to offer them, to put them before the public or to put them before the board for vote if they're seconded. So and at this point, the second amendment was voted on. I believe we've established a procedure for how this is handled. It's Mr. Redding's advice that it's out of order, and maybe that can be reviewed at a later time period, but I do think I have the right and ability to do this as an elected board member.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get to the point of, if you're asking for an amendment, if you're asking for several different amendments to the law, and each one is a specific different amendment to that law, why not just propose the law? And then, this is what I'm proposing, to amend the law to be X, Y, Z, and have the board vote on it. I mean, that's fine. We can go ahead and we can do amendment 3, amendment 4, amendment 5, et cetera.
I'm sorry, Rob.
No, that's okay.
To me, I just think it's a cleaner process. I'm not grandstanding. I think it's important that each specific provision is voted on. Going back to an amendment that I offered, frankly, going back to a budget amendment I offered, going back to last year, I offered a budget amendment as one. And at the time, Councilman Pilavani indicated that he would have voted for, or would have considered voting for an amendment if it was broken up. So I do think it's important to break them up. I kind of learned my lesson during that part.
Could we not bring this to a work session like we've asked you to do over and over again and have a discussion as we normally do? Our normal process, as you know, Mike, you've been on the board long enough, our normal process is to have a discussion at the work session and then bring forward a resolution, either fully supported or supported somewhat or whatever, or maybe never, you never get the support at the work session. But I think it's, instead of trying to do these amendments, is to have a comprehensive look at this, which we've been asking for. I've been asking for over a year now from you, and you're just doing this now as a way to grandstand. I think it's better if we actually sit down and have a discussion on it.
So, Mr. Supervisor, can I say something?
Yes.
So this probably could have come up at a work session last week, but you deemed last week's work session not necessary because there was nothing to be talked about. And if this wasn't something to be talked about, because at the work session before, you asked me to come back with some ideas and bring them to the next work session. And then there was no work session.
So there was no communication from either you or any counselor, to be honest with you, that's saying that we need to, let me finish. When that email went out, why don't you let me finish?
I was speaking and you jumped in.
Because you accused me of not having a work session on an issue, and that's not true.
Because we had nothing to do.
Nobody-
We should talk about it in a work session.
Okay, nobody said, no, you guys, come on, this is getting to be
It's fair for
out
you
of
to-
order.
You can
It's
talk
fair
for
for me to bring, it's okay
No.
for me to-
Let me answer the question.
Okay.
If you let me answer the question, you're asking a question now. Typically, a board member will respond to me and say, Chris, I have something I'd like to talk about. And then I say, okay, then let's talk about it. You did not say you had a word to talk about even after I asked you about it. You did not say you had a word to talk about after I asked you about it.
Give me a chance to respond.
So no, I'm still responding to Councilman Aragosa. So nobody brought forward a work session agenda item. You can't just sit in silence wherever you
You
are.
had one. You planned a meeting earlier in the day that had to get canceled.
You did not say, you did not say you needed anything.
We had this whole thing that we could have talked about.
I don't know. This is good.
Last Wednesday, there was supposed to be a meeting of the ethics committee that was canceled.
The political
We talked
process
about this.
apparently has begun.
And now, we didn't need a work session, but we could have talked about it during the work session.
Why didn't you call
Okay.
Chris and say you wanted a work session tonight? It's that
Because he
simple.
doesn't do that. Because it's better to
That's ridiculous.
grandstands.
For future, that'll be the way it goes.
That's the way it's going.
It's always been that way.
All you gotta do is call.
So I would just like to be heard on this.
What, you have to be sought out?
I've been. so-
That's what he's
so if I-
asking for, apparently.
So if I could.
Especially-
Point of order.
This is incredible political.
This is a political grandstand job right now. So let's let Godlewski continue and we'll just keep moving. Okay, please continue.
So a couple points here. First off, I've witnessed instances where Councilman Aragosa has asked to speak about certain items at work session, and that was not permitted. And that's been over my
It's patently
two
untrue.
and a half years on this town board, where he's asked for specific items to be added to the work session agenda, and were reasons why we couldn't discuss those items were given. Second, putting this law on to call for public hearing, we got no notice of that. The only reason we even knew that there was a Board of Ethics meeting occurring, the first Board of Ethics meeting that occurred in over 10 years, was by secondhand information. The supervisor at the last meeting did not include that in his remarks about the fact that there had been, you would think that a Board of Ethics meeting, the first one in 10 years, would have made supervisor's comments. It didn't. It was only upon questioning for me that he disclosed that. I did draft a letter, and I did submit a letter to the chairman of the Board of Ethics on notice to our town attorneys that I had concerns about the Board of Ethics meeting because I felt that it violated the open meetings law. What I heard again secondhand was that that Board of Ethics meeting was canceled as a result, and that's where it was left. And then all of a sudden.
As a point of order, Mr. Godlewski, we are on a resolution.
Sure.
And we're going to talk about the resolution. We're not talking about the history of work sessions
that's
at this juncture.
can
So we are on a resolution. I'm back to resolution 11. I have a motion. I have a second. Any discussion?
Yes, I would offer an amendment as follows, Mr. Supervisor. I would seek to amend section 27.7, the Code of Ethics entitled Establishment. And the new text would read, the ethics board members shall be appointed by the affirmative vote of at least 4 members of the town board. And that would be my motion.
We have a second.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor. This specific language is pulled from the Town of Wilton's Code of Ethics. I would again note that the Town of Clifton Park has actually an even stricter policy. They require unanimous vote of town board for ethics board members. There are a number of different municipalities that put various requirements on who is on the Board of Ethics. Some talk about the ethics board members, certain ones only having a limited number of what political party ethics board members can be a member of. But I think as far as establishing the Board of Ethics, it's important that we make sure that this is a nonpartisan group of volunteers, that nobody comes in to the ethics board with any agenda or anything. So I do think that this, and frankly, it's not unheard of outside of the Wilton Town Code to require a supermajority on some votes before the town. As members of up there may be aware, section 33 of the local finance law requires a 2/3 or supermajority vote on any matters going out for bonding. So I do think that there's ample precedent that would support this resolution.
Thank you. Other questions or comments? Seeing none, please record the vote on the amendment.
Councilman Martin,
No,
Councilman Aragosa.
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski.
Yes.
Councilwoman Rosbowski.
I'm again voting no because I believe Mr. Godlewski should be bringing these forth so the board can actually have time to consider them, talk about them. I think this is an inappropriate forum on this particular resolution for him to do so. My vote is no.
Supervisor Ketzler.
On advice to council, and because it is out of order, no. The amendment has failed. We are on resolution 11. Have a motion and a second. Do I have any comments?
Supervisor, I would offer an amendment. I would offer a sentence be added to section 27(8) duties, which states as follows. A written request for an advisory opinion regarding any official or employee of the town for any violation of this chapter shall be submitted to the town ethics board in care of its chairman. It must contain sworn allegations of facts setting forth the name and title of the official or employee, the nature of the alleged violation, and the name and address of the complainant. And that would be my motion.
Have a motion. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Moved in second. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor, this provision is taken verbatim or almost verbatim from the town of Boston Code of Ethics. I think this is a good protection to bake into the process. This would eliminate frivolous complaints, it would eliminate anonymous complaints, give an added level of fairness to the process and allow for ethics board members to talk to them when necessary.
Any questions or comments? Seeing none, please record the vote on the amendment.
Councilman Martin?
No,
Councilman Aragosa?
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski?
Yes.
Councilwoman Wozzachowski?
No,
Supervisor Pettsley?
To explain my vote again, because I believe it's out of order and I don't believe it's appropriate, I'm going to vote no, but I'm going to tell you, Mr. Godlewski, that particularly that one, I think needs to come back for discussion. I don't think that that's necessarily something that we would have an objection to, but I do signal that we're open to some of these things, but this is the wrong venue, so I vote no. The amendment fails.
Mr. Supervisor, I'd offer an amendment as follows. I'd seek to amend section 27(5)(f), shall be amended to read, quote, as follows. Simultaneously with his or her town employment, hold another public sector office, position, or employment in which the individual regularly does business with the town. Regularly does business with the town shall be defined as at least one substantive dealing with the town per week.
Okay, so that's a motion. Do I have a second?
Second.
Moved in second. Any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor. I believe, and we had this discussion at the August work session, that it's important when we're looking at framing text of the, specifically the Code of Ethics, that we provide clear guidance from the legislative body as to what terms and words mean or are intended to mean. This removes a level of ambiguity which currently exists in this code as proposed, and clarifies that business must be between the individual and, of course, if their employment must occur weekly. I did spend time working with Councilman Martin on the Zoning Code Revision Committee, and from my recollection, this was the name of that committee over the course of the past 2 years to make sure that we had clear language that could be read and interpreted by a layperson, so it was clear to them whether or not they were following the code or in violation of the code, specifically with regards to building projects, considering that those are the people that are trying to follow through.
Okay, so any other questions or comments?
Mr.
I,
Supervisor,
go ahead. Jim.
the only thing I would say to Councilman Godlewski is I find it unfortunate that you chose this particular approach, because I think that some of what you're saying has merit. However, it's unfair to expect myself to sit here and have to think about these things and make a decision on something that will affect the town boards and the town employees going forward. I really do wish that you had taken the opportunity when Chris sent us the email saying that the work session was canceled. I do wish that you had taken the opportunity to speak up, which I have done on many occasions throughout my time on the board, and say, actually, Chris, I did what you asked.
Absolutely.
It came up with a bunch of stuff for us to talk about so that we could have talked about it. Because obviously, what you're doing now is creating aggravation amongst all of us. And I don't think that that's a good look for any of us. So that's the only comment that I would
If
offer.
I could just respond. Councilwoman Wozzachowski, I specifically recall a budget amendment that you offered last year with no prior notice to myself or Councilman Aragosa regarding fees received from or under the UCC. That was provided to, that was offered, that was voted upon, that was approved.
The budget amendment.
With no prior notice to minority members on the town board. So I do think this is an appropriate mechanism for me to do this. And certainly the fact that we're not actually voting on the law this evening but we're just voting on what's going to go before the public allows, as Chris talked about, allows for a 3-week process for people to consider where they stand on some of these issues, even if they're not approving it.
Okay, Jim, you had something you want to say?
I just want to say on the substance of this particular amendment, I will never agree to weekly. That is a poor definition. On the substance, I disagree.
Okay, so we have any other comments or questions? Seeing none, please record the vote on the amendment.
Councilman Martin?
No,
Councilman Aragosa?
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski?
Yes.
Councilwoman Wozzowski?
No,
Supervisor Pettsley?
No, resolution amendment to the resolution fails.
where are we in the amendment number? What
gotta
one is this? coming up?
62?
This is number 6.
Okay,
We're getting there.
thank you.
I would,
Councilman Dubowski, I would just for the sake of Linda, if you could provide your amendments afterwards.
Well, I was going to ask if you could provide your amendments to the board so everyone can
Yeah,
read
I
them.
would appreciate
We
that.
provided everything in writing, and Councilman Aragosa particularly said he needed at least 2 weeks to read it, so
Yeah,
we should be able to, I know, why don't we
Where's that
enforce
rule?
that rule at this point?
Oh,
I guess it works one way when it wants to and another way when it needs to, but we're on the amendment.
so if I could just respond to what's been said. I have these all typewritten. I made a couple of changes in handwriting. I'm happy to provide and circulate them.
Oh, well,
Thank
thank
you.
you, Mike. That's
We
big of you.
appreciate that.
Really big of you.
Specifically to Ms. Neal, I will make sure.
Okay, thanks,
Well,
Mike.
maybe Linda will get
Much
them.
appreciated.
So
I'll foil them.
I would, at this time, I would offer an amendment to section 27.5F of the Code of Ethics. Section 27.5F shall be amended to read, quote, as follows. Simultaneously with his or her town employment, hold another public sector office or position or employment incompatible with his or her town office or employment. That's my,
Do we have a second?
I second.
Moved in second. Any discussion?
yes, Mr. Supervisor. This amendment, as drafted, removes language currently existing in the code, which frankly I believe is illegal. Puts wording in or transports it with wording that is on par with the existing body of case law regarding municipal ethics in this specific subject matter.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, please record the vote on the amendment.
Once again, I agree on the merits and substance of or I disagree on the merits and substance of the amendment proposed. No.
Yes.
Yes.
Councilwoman Wozzowski?
no,
Nobody was called for vote.
Supervisor Pettsley?
No, the amendment fails. Before we go forward, I'm just going to ask the board members to please continue to act appropriately. The clerk will call your name before your vote. Please do not vote before the clerk calls your name. And please, let's just show respect for each other, respect for our residents, our guests here, and take everything down a notch. We do have a resolution before us, resolution 11. Do I have any other questions or comments?
Yes, Mr. Supervisor, I would make a motion to amend section 27.4 of the Code of Ethics, which states, which is titled conflict of interest. And I would seek to insert the following language. In order to avoid the appearance of impropriety, any town employee simultaneously employed in a field that actively solicits clients and provides a service, wherefore they receive compensation in exchange for said service, shall be required to keep on file with the town clerk's office a yearly updated list of all clients being served by that individual.
Do I have a second?
Yes.
Moved and seconded. For discussion, just can you give us some examples of that? Is that like an engineering firm or?
Certainly, if there's an individual who's in a field, and your role is that you are actively soliciting business, you are actively advertising yourself as somebody who takes on clients, you are actively putting yourself out there, whether it be a website, the trade in which you are, and again, this is for secondary employment, to ensure that there's full disclosure to the public. This would require a list be maintained by the town clerk for the foilable list for review by the public to ensure that business dealings aren't overlapping with people who do business regularly in the town of Glenville, that there's no, dare I say, quid pro quo, and that this is something that is viewable to the public.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, please record the vote on the amendment.
Councilman Martin?
No.
Councilman Aragosa?
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski?
Yes.
Councilwoman Wozzowski?
No.
Supervisor Pettsley?
No, amendment fails. We're on resolution 11. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, please record the vote.
This is on the resolution.
This is on the resolution.
Okay.
Yes.
We're there, Linda.
Councilman Martin?
Yes.
Councilman Aragosa?
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski?
Just to explain my vote, the resolution for the board currently is putting the issue out to public hearing. As noted, I have a lot of issues with the current text of this law. I think there are provisions in this law that I believe there are provisions in this law that are illegal as currently offered. I would certainly encourage members of the public to come and weigh in on this law until the 7 p.m. As a town board member, job to hear from the public, solicit input from the public. I think it would be detrimental to vote against a public hearing, but I can tell you right now that this law is currently written, does not have my support. I have no intention of voting for this law as currently written, but on the issue of the public hearings, if you heard from the public, I'd like that.
Councilwoman Wozzowski?
Yes.
Supervisor Pettsley?
Yes, resolution passes. Next resolution 12, approving the town board minutes for September 2nd. Do I have a motion?
I move it.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Moved in second. Any discussion?
Mr. Supervisor, this is one of our folks on the resolution. This is would approve the town board minutes from the last town board meeting. And I would thank, just circulate this by email, and I would thank the staff for the time.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, please record the vote.
Councilman Martin?
Yes.
Councilman Aragosa?
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski?
Yes.
Councilwoman Wozzowski?
Yes.
Supervisor Pettsley?
Yes, resolution passes. Next resolution 13, approving monthly departmental reports for August 2020. Do I have a motion?
I move it.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Moved in second. Any discussion?
Again, Mr. Supervisor, one of our more pro forma resolutions, distributed department heads reports from the town. This would approve by email. This would approve the content.
Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, please record the vote.
Councilman Martin?
Yes.
Councilman Aragosa?
Yes.
Councilman Godlewski?
Yes.
Councilwoman Wozzowski?
Yes.
Supervisor Pettsley?
Yes, resolution passes. Next, actually, new business. On to new business. We'll start on my left with Councilman Galuski.
There's been some discussion. I sent an email about holding an executive session. I know that it's not on the agenda. I think that's more probably in line with the preferred mechanism that you all have offered here tonight. I was just curious as to why that's not on the agenda. We're not going into executive session to discuss a personnel matter.
Correct. We're not prepared at this juncture to have that discussion. Council has asked to have a discussion with the department head and myself, and we will be able to do that at a very near date, have probably a special executive session only meeting.
Yeah, so what we're doing is we are going to meet with the department head, supervisor, and I before we meet with the town board to discuss that matter, the personnel matters with the department. And I believe the department head has at least been attempted to be
Yes.
contacted, and we're hoping to set up that meeting shortly. I thought that was the best procedure before we go into executive session.
We do have it set up.
Okay, so it's set up. Okay, so we're set up with the department head to meet. And then we will discuss it with the board after that, and after we've had some discussion with the department.
Okay.
That sound okay?
That's all I have.
Councilwoman Wozzowski.
I have nothing.
Councilman Martin.
Nothing new.
Councilman Aragosa.
Just one thing, I'm gonna boast my youngest child for a minute. My daughter Jenna is a student at the Culinary Arts School, SEC. They're starting a program where they're doing curbside meals to go at the Casola Dining Center. You can go online, order your dinners, pick them up there. Lot of, not only my daughter, but a lot of other Scotia little kids that are involved in that program. So look into it. Thank you.
Thank you. The only thing I have new is that we will be having an executive session at some point. At that juncture, if anybody has anything that they would like discussed at a work session, we can have a special work session on the 23rd and maybe we could plan for an executive session after that work session. But that's something that we can certainly do. If we get the text in time, Mike, we might be able to have a discussion on your proposals, your package of proposals. I want to say, I know we're getting into the time of year where people start thinking about other things than town business. You can determine what that is for yourself. I ask again, if we can just maintain a certain level of respect for each other and understand that we are here representing the residents of the town, and that we can work together, that we can communicate and say that you want something on an agenda, let us know. We can work on doing that. I know you have a mask on, Mr. Aragosa, but I could see you smiling. Your eyes give it away. I'm asking that we work together this coming year and not turn this into a sideshow, not turn this into something that is going to be adversarial going forward. And that's all I have on a new business. And just ask that we maintain the rules of the board. The rules of the board have been in place for a long, long time, and we just want to make sure that we're maintaining the rules of the board. So with that, I would take a motion to adjourn.
I'll move it.
Take a second.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you. Thank you all for those who held on through all that. Not many of you, but we appreciate it. Thank you. Have a good night.